My name is Amelia. I'm 42 years old now, but the story I'm about to tell you started a little over a decade ago when I was standing on the financial and emotional precipice of my life. It's a story about betrayal, about public humiliation orchestrated by someone who shared my blood, my own sister, Claire. She didn't just witness my downfall, she grabbed a megaphone and broadcasted it from the rooftops, ensuring my lowest moment was a spectacle for anyone who would listen and many who wouldn't have otherwise known. She stood there, metaphorically of course, but the impact was just as visceral, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my tattered life, her voice dripping with a satisfaction that still chills me to the bone. She thought she was delivering the final, crushing blow, the one that would ensure I remained a cautionary tale, a footnote in our family's narrative of her successes. What Claire, in her infinite, smug wisdom, failed to realize was that in trying to bury me, she handed me a shovel. And oh, I dug. I dug myself out of the pit she so gleefully pointed out, and then I kept digging, unearthing a strength I never knew I possessed. That strength, fueled by a quiet, burning resolve, eventually led me to a place neither of us could have ever predicted. It led me to the grand, wrought-iron gates of Oakhaven Manor, the very mansion Claire had plastered on her vision board since she was a teenager, the one she spoke of not as a dream, but as an inevitability for her. The difference? I wasn't just looking at it. I was signing the papers, the scent of fresh ink mingling with the old money perfume of the solicitor's office, my bank account significantly lighter, but my spirit soaring. Paid in full. Cash. No mortgage, no loans, just the culmination of years of silent, grinding work and an unyielding refusal to be defined by her cruelty or my past failures. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine the person who delighted in your ruin, who used your vulnerability as a punchline, suddenly confronted with a reality so far removed from the narrative they'd spun, it shatters their entire worldview. What would you do if your deepest pain was publicly exploited by family? How would you react if the world saw you stripped bare, not by circumstance alone, but by the malicious intent of someone you should have been able to trust implicitly? It's a question I grappled with in the dark for a long, long time. And the answer I found wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. Not really. It was about reclamation. It was about rewriting my story, not in hushed whispers of shame, but in bold, undeniable strokes of triumph. Hey everyone, it's Amelia, and welcome to my channel. Before I unpack the years of drama, heartache, and ultimately, sweet vindication that led to that rather spectacular property purchase, I genuinely love to connect with you all. Where are you tuning in from today? Let me know in the comments down below. I always find it so fascinating to see how far these stories travel. And hey, if you're new around here and you're already intrigued by that little teaser, please do consider hitting that subscribe button and tapping the bell icon so you don't miss out on future updates or other stories I might share. And if you've got a feeling this is going to be one of those stories that just gets you, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. Your support truly means the world, and it helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them. It tells the algorithm that this is the kind of content people want to see: real stories, real struggles, and hopefully real inspiration. Believe me when I say, the journey from being the family failure, the one whispered about at gatherings, to standing on the manicured lawns of Oakhaven as its rightful owner is paved with more twists and turns than a mountain road. And Claire's face when she found out? Well, let's just say it was worth more than the down payment. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This isn't just about the house. It's about how one of the most devastating betrayals of my life became the catalyst for my greatest comeback. It's about how shame can be a prison, but also, if you find the key, a launching pad. So, buckle up. Now, let me take you back to how this all began, to the roots of a family dynamic that was, shall we say, uniquely challenging. It's important you understand the landscape of my childhood and young adulthood to grasp the full weight of Claire's actions and, dare I say, the exquisite justice of it all. It all started long before the bankruptcy, long before the public shaming. It started in the subtle and not so subtle ways Claire was elevated and I was tolerated. Our family wasn't overtly cruel in those early days, not in a way that would make headlines or warrant intervention. It was more insidious than that, a slow drip of favoritism that eroded my sense of worth before I even understood what self-worth was. My parents, bless their hearts in some ways, were flawed like any human beings. But their primary flaw, as I experienced it, was their utter inability to see their two daughters as individuals of equal value. Claire, 2 years my senior, was the sun around which our family unofficially orbited. She was beautiful, precocious, and possessed an uncanny ability to charm her way into getting exactly what she wanted. From the earliest age, she was the gifted one, the popular one, the one destined for great things. Her achievements, no matter how small, were trumpeted with fanfare. Her missteps were quickly smoothed over, excused as youthful exuberance or the understandable stumbles of someone so obviously talented. I, on the other hand, was Amelia, quiet, observant, perhaps a little too serious for my age. My successes were met with a polite nod, my failures with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of disappointment. I wasn't a problem child, far from it. I was studious, responsible, always eager to please, perhaps in a desperate bid to earn a fraction of the effortless adoration Claire received. I remember one specific Christmas when I was about 10. I'd spent weeks, saving up my pocket money and doing extra chores to buy my mother a specific brand of perfume she'd idly mentioned wanting. It was a huge deal for me, a significant sacrifice. Claire, on the other hand, had dashed off a rather generic drawing of a flower. When Mum opened our gifts, she gushed over Claire's drawing, framing it almost immediately, declaring it showed such artistic promise. My perfume received a cursory, "Oh, that's nice, dear," before being placed on her dresser, where it remained unopened for years. It wasn't the lack of gratitude that stung as much as the stark contrast, the casual dismissal of my effort compared to the lionization of Claire's minimal offering. This pattern repeated itself endlessly, in big ways and small. School plays, Claire always got the lead, or at least a role that garnered attention. I was usually stage crew or a tree. Report cards, Claire's B+s were celebrated as almost A's from our brilliant girl, while my straight A's were met with, "Well, Amelia, you always were good at studying," as if it were a mundane, expected chore, like taking out the trash. The narrative was set early. Claire was destined for a life of sparkle and ease, and I was just Amelia, the reliable, background hum. This wasn't just parental bias. Claire absorbed this narrative and ran with it. She developed an air of entitlement that was breathtaking to behold. She expected the best, demanded it even, and rarely considered the feelings or needs of others, least of all mine. If I had something she wanted, she'd wheedle, manipulate, or simply take it, often with our parents' tacit approval or their weary, "Oh, Amelia, just let her have it. You know how she is." I learned early on to keep my treasures hidden, my dreams small, my voice quiet. It was easier than fighting a losing battle, than facing the inevitable disappointment. The seeds of my later financial woes were, in some ways, sown in this environment. Not because I was taught to be irresponsible with money, quite the opposite. I was taught to be frugal, to make do, to expect less. But I also internalized a deep-seated belief that I wasn't deserving of abundance, that my efforts wouldn't be truly valued, and perhaps that I was destined to struggle while others, like Claire, effortlessly floated through life. This isn't to absolve myself of my later mistakes, but the psychological groundwork was definitely laid in those formative years, under the long shadow cast by my golden child sister. The disparity in our upbringing continued into our teenage years and young adulthood, becoming more pronounced and, for me, more painful. While Claire was showered with support for her various fleeting passions, ballet lessons, quit after 6 months, expensive art supplies, used once, a down payment for a trendy car she absolutely needed for her social life, I was encouraged to get a part-time job as soon as I was legally able, to learn the value of money and contribute. There was never any offer to help me with driving lessons, let alone a car. When I wanted to go on a school trip, it was assumed I would pay for it myself, which I did, by waitressing every weekend. Claire's equivalent trip? Funded by Mom and Dad, of course, because it was an important cultural experience for her. The excuse was always that Claire needed more encouragement, or that she was more sensitive. The reality, as I saw it, was that Claire was simply better at demanding and receiving. She had an innate understanding of how to play the system, how to tug at our parents' heartstrings or appeal to their vanity about having such a promising daughter. I, on the other hand, was pragmatic, perhaps to a fault. I saw a need, I figured out how to meet it, and I got on with it. This self-reliance, born out of necessity, was ironically often used as a reason why I didn't need as much help. "Oh, Amelia will manage. She's so resourceful," was a common refrain. It was a backhanded compliment that essentially translated to, "You're on your own." As we moved into our 20s, Claire drifted from one exciting opportunity to another, often funded by our parents or a quickly acquired boyfriend. She dabbled in interior design, then event planning, then considered becoming a lifestyle blogger. None of these ventures ever truly took off, usually fizzling out when they required sustained effort or didn't yield immediate, glamorous results. Yet, each new endeavor was met with fresh enthusiasm and financial backing from our parents. I, meanwhile, had methodically worked my way through college, juggling studies and multiple part-time jobs. I chose a practical degree, something I thought would lead to stability, because I knew I couldn't count on a safety net. After graduation, I started my own small graphic design business. It was a passion, yes, but also a pragmatic choice, low overheads to begin with, and a skill I could market. The early years were tough. Long hours, chasing clients, learning the ropes of entrepreneurship the hard way. There were no parental loans to tide me over, no introductions to influential contacts. I built it from scratch, fueled by lukewarm coffee and sheer determination. During this time, Claire would often call, not to offer support, but usually to complain about her latest disaster. A bad breakup, a toxic work environment, usually one she'd created, or the sheer unfairness of not being recognized for her obvious talents. Often, these calls would end with a request for money, sometimes subtly hinted at, sometimes shockingly direct. "Millie, darling," she'd coo, using a childhood nickname that always felt like a prelude to a demand. "I'm in such a bind. This incredible opportunity has come up, but I'm just a little short. You're doing so well with your little business. Couldn't you just?" And I, conditioned by years of trying to please, of wanting to be seen as helpful and capable, would often cave. Not always, but more often than I should have. Each time, I'd tell myself it was the last time, that she'd learn, that our parents would finally step in and teach her some responsibility. It never happened. The business that eventually led to my bankruptcy was an expansion of my graphic design work into a small, bespoke marketing agency. It was ambitious, I'll admit. I took on a small office lease, hired a couple of staff. For a while, things were looking up. We landed a few decent clients. The work was creatively fulfilling, and I felt, for the first time, like I was truly building something of my own, something substantial. But the market was volatile, and I made some naive decisions. One particularly large client, who accounted for nearly 40% of our revenue, went bust themselves, owing us a significant amount. It was a body blow. Cash flow, always tight in a young business, became a torrent of red. I poured my personal savings in, trying to keep things afloat, trying to protect my employees. I worked 18-hour days, neglecting my health, my social life, everything. I was too proud, too conditioned to be resourceful Amelia, to ask for help from my parents. I knew what the answer would be: a lecture, a comparison to Claire, who, despite her lack of steady income, always seemed to land on her feet, usually in a new pair of designer shoes funded by someone else, and ultimately, no real assistance. The stress was immense. It was during this incredibly vulnerable period, as I was desperately trying to navigate the choppy waters of potential insolvency, that the real inciting incident, the one that truly set the stage for Claire's later public shaming, occurred. It wasn't the bankruptcy itself, but a prelude, a family event where the cracks in our facade became gaping chasms. The catalyst for my eventual bankruptcy wasn't one single event, but rather a perfect storm of bad luck, some poor business decisions on my part, which I fully own, and a distinct lack of any kind of safety net or support from the people who should have been there. The major client defaulting was a huge blow, as I mentioned. It was like a gaping wound in my company's finances, and I was hemorrhaging money trying to cover payroll, rent, and operational costs while simultaneously trying to drum up new business to replace what was lost. I remortgaged my small apartment, maxed out my credit cards, and took out a high-interest business loan, all in a desperate attempt to stay afloat. I was operating on sheer adrenaline and fear. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, and my diet consisted mainly of coffee and anxiety. During this time, my parents were, as usual, preoccupied with Claire. She had just announced her engagement to a man named Richard, who came from a moderately wealthy family. The wedding planning instantly became the sole focus of every family conversation. My mother was ecstatic, already envisioning the society pages. Claire, naturally, was in her element, planning an extravagant affair that seemed to grow more opulent by the day. She'd call me, not to ask how I was, because the assumption was always that Amelia's fine, she can handle anything, but to dictate tasks related to her wedding. Millie, could you design the invitations? But they have to look super high-end, like something from Tiffany's, but obviously for free because you're family, or I need you to scout some unique but affordable venues for the bridal shower. Nothing too déclassé. Darling, the irony of her asking me, someone literally drowning in debt, to contribute free labor and scout luxurious venues was apparently lost on her and on our parents, who would chime in with, "Oh, that's a wonderful idea, Amelia, you have such good taste and it would be such a help to your sister." The pressure was immense. I was trying to save my business, my livelihood, my home, and yet the expectation was that I would drop everything to cater to Claire's bridal whims. I did design the invitations, staying up for 3 consecutive nights after my grueling workdays to get them perfect. I didn't have the energy to fight, and a small, pathetic part of me still hoped that maybe, just maybe, this gesture would earn me some goodwill, some acknowledgement. It didn't. The invitations were received with a cursory, "They're okay, I suppose." A bit simple, but they'll do, that was it. No thank you. No appreciation for the hours I'd poured in while my own life was crumbling. The final straw financially came when a smaller, but still significant, client disputed their final invoice over a ridiculous technicality, tying up funds I was desperately counting on. Legal fees to fight it would have been prohibitive. It was then I realized I was out of options. The weight of it all was crushing. I had failed. Amelia, the resourceful one, the one who always managed, hadn't managed. I had to face the grim reality of declaring bankruptcy. The shame was suffocating. I felt like I'd let down my employees, whom I'd already had to let go one by one, with severance I could barely afford, my creditors and myself. My biggest fear, however, was telling my family. I knew what the reaction would be, especially from Claire. I put it off for as long as I could, hoping for a miracle that never came. The day I filed the papers was one of the darkest of my life. The stark, impersonal finality of it all felt like a brand on my soul. A few days later, knowing I couldn't hide it forever, especially with Claire's wedding looming and the inevitable questions about my financial contribution, or lack thereof, I decided I had to tell them. I chose what I thought was a quiet moment, calling my mother first. Her reaction was a mixture of disappointment and thinly veiled, "I told you so's," about the folly of starting my own business. "Well, Amelia," she sighed, "I always said you should have gotten a safe government job. Your father and I are very disappointed. What will people think? And how will this affect Claire's wedding? We can't have this mess overshadowing her special day." My heart sank. Not a word of concern for me, for my well-being. Just worry about appearances and Claire. It was exactly what I expected, yet it still cut deep. Telling Claire was even worse. I tried to do it privately, but she insisted on a video call, wanting to show me yet another potential bridesmaid dress. When I finally managed to blurt out the news, her initial reaction was stunned silence, then a slow, incredulous smirk. "Bankrupt," she said, drawing the word out as if it were the most delicious gossip. "You, Amelia? Miss Responsible?" How utterly predictable. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. "Well, don't expect any handouts from me and Richard," she added quickly. We're saving for the wedding, and honestly, this is just typical of you, creating drama right before my big day. That was the private prelude. The public shaming was yet to come, and it would be far, far more brutal. The public shaming, the event that truly burned itself into my memory and became the unquenchable fuel for my subsequent transformation, happened at Claire's engagement party. Just a few weeks after I'd broken the news of my bankruptcy to my family privately, Claire and Richard hosted a lavish gathering at a trendy city restaurant. It was supposed to be a joyous celebration of their upcoming nuptials, a showcase of their perfect life. For me, it was an ordeal I dreaded, but felt obligated to attend. My parents had made it clear that my absence would be deeply hurtful to Claire and would only draw more attention to my situation, so I put on the best dress I still owned, plastered a smile on my face that felt like cracking porcelain, and walked into what I can only describe as an ambush. The party was in full swing, champagne flowing, laughter echoing a little too loudly. Claire, of course, was holding court, resplendent in a designer dress, Richard beaming by her side. I tried to blend into the background, exchanging polite, superficial greetings, acutely aware of the whispers and sidelong glances that seemed to follow me. I knew my mother had likely, in her own way of managing the narrative, already informed key family members and friends about my unfortunate business troubles about an hour into the party. Richard's father, a jovial, slightly pompous man, stood up to make a toast. He spoke warmly of his son, welcomed Claire into their family, and then, to my horror, he said, "And now, I believe Claire has a few words she'd like to share." My stomach clenched. Claire, never one to miss an opportunity for drama or self-aggrandizement, took the center of the room, her smile dazzlingly bright, but with an undercurrent I recognized all too well, the glint of impending malice. She thanked everyone for coming, spoke glowingly of Richard, and then her tone shifted. "And speaking of family," she began, her eyes sweeping the room before landing directly on me, "I think it's important to be honest and transparent, especially in times of celebration." My blood ran cold. I just knew where this was going. "As many of you know," she continued, her voice dripping with mock sympathy, "my dear sister Amelia has recently fallen on some hard times." A collective murmur went through the room. My face was burning. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. She's had a bit of a setback with her little business venture, and well, to put it plainly, she's gone bankrupt. She delivered the word bankrupt with a theatrical flourish, as if revealing a shocking plot twist in a play. Gasps, more whispers. I could feel every eye in the room on me, a mixture of pity, curiosity, and thinly veiled contempt. "It's terribly sad, of course," Claire went on, dabbing at a non-existent tear with a lace handkerchief. "And while Richard and I are embarking on this beautiful new chapter, it's a stark reminder that not everyone is so fortunate, or perhaps so fiscally responsible." The insinuation hung heavy in the air. She wasn't just stating a fact. She was branding me, shaming me, using my profound personal and financial failure as a perverse kind of entertainment, a backdrop against which her own success could shine even brighter. "We, of course, wish her all the best in sorting herself out," she concluded, her smile now openly condescending. "But it does mean she won't be able to contribute to the wedding in the way we'd hoped, or even afford a new dress. Poor thing." She then raised her champagne flute. "So, let's toast to new beginnings for us, and well, to Amelia finding her feet again." Eventually, the toast was hesitant, awkward. A few people clinked glasses, most just looked uncomfortable. I was frozen, mortified beyond words. Tears were stinging my eyes, but I refused to let them fall, refused to give her the satisfaction. I could feel my parents' eyes on me, not with support, but with a kind of embarrassed resignation. They didn't intervene, didn't say a word to stop her. In their eyes, Claire could do no wrong, and my humiliation was just an unfortunate, but perhaps necessary, consequence of my own failings. I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. But instead, a cold, hard knot of something entirely new began to form in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just shame or despair anymore. It was rage.
Apure, clarifying rage.
And beneath the rage, a flicker of resolve. She thought this was the end of my story. She thought she had reduced me to nothing more than poor, bankrupt Amelia. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. I managed to mumble some excuse and fled the restaurant, the echoes of her triumphant, cruel laughter ringing in my ears. That night, I didn't cry. I sat in my small, soon-to-be-lost apartment, and I made a promise to myself. I would not be defined by this. I would not let her win. I would rebuild, not just my finances, but myself. And one day, somehow, I would show her and everyone else who had written me off exactly what Amelia was capable of. The seed of Oakhaven Manor wasn't planted that night, not consciously. But the fertile ground of absolute, unyielding determination was tilled. The public shaming was the catalyst I never asked for, but perhaps, in some twisted way, the one I needed. The aftermath of that engagement party was brutal. The calls from concerned and not so concerned relatives trickled in, each conversation a fresh layer of humiliation. My parents offered platitudes and unsolicited advice, mostly centered around me finding a sensible job and keeping a low profile so as not to cause further embarrassment. Claire, meanwhile, reveled in her moment. She became even more demanding about the wedding, her calls now laced with a smug superiority that was almost unbearable. "Amelia, darling, since you're not exactly busy with work anymore," she'd say, "perhaps you could run these errands for me?" The implication was clear. My time was worthless, my situation a punchline. I did my best to withdraw, to create some space for myself to breathe and think. The bankruptcy proceedings were a nightmare of paperwork, meetings with trustees, and the systematic dismantling of what little I had left. I lost my apartment and had to move into a tiny, dingy bedsit in a less than desirable part of town. The contrast between my new reality and the opulent wedding Claire was planning was a constant, bitter reminder of how far I'd fallen and how gleefully she seemed to be rising at my expense. It was during those dark, isolating months that the first seeds of my comeback began to sprout, almost imperceptibly at first. The rage from the engagement party hadn't dissipated. It had cooled, solidified into a diamond-hard core of resolve. I knew I couldn't stay in that bedsit, wallowing in self-pity and resentment, forever. That would be letting Claire win. My first step was a practical one. I needed an income, any income. My reputation in the local marketing scene was tarnished, and the thought of trying to rebuild my agency then felt overwhelming. So, I swallowed my pride. I took a job as a barista in a small, independent coffee shop. The pay was minimum wage, the hours were long, and it was a far cry from the entrepreneurial dreams I'd once harbored. Some days, customers I'd known in my previous life would come in, their expressions a mixture of surprise and pity. It was humbling, to say the least. But that coffee shop job, as soul-crushing as it sometimes felt, gave me a routine. It got me out of bed. And it gave me something crucial, time to think, away from the immediate pressures of my past life. During my breaks, and late into the night in my tiny room, I started to learn. The internet became my university. I'd always been tech-savvy from my graphic design background, but now I dived deep into areas I'd only skimmed before: digital marketing, SEO, e-commerce, coding. I devoured free online courses, read articles, watched tutorials. I realized that the digital landscape was vast and constantly evolving, and there were opportunities there for someone willing to learn and adapt. A friend from my old college days, Liam, was a lifeline during this period. He was one of the few people who hadn't judged me, who had offered genuine support without pity. He was a software developer, and he encouraged my tentative steps into the tech world. He'd look over the small coding projects I set for myself, offer advice, and, most importantly, he believed in me. "You've got the brains and the grit, Amelia," he'd say. "This bankruptcy doesn't define you. It's a chapter, not the whole story." His unwavering faith was like a balm to my bruised ego. Slowly, I started taking on tiny freelance gigs online, writing blog posts for small businesses, designing simple logos for clients halfway across the world, managing social media for a pittance. Each 5-star review, each small payment, was a tiny victory, affirmation that I still had skills, that I could still create value. It was a painstakingly slow process. There were many moments of doubt, days when the weight of my past failures and Claire's mocking voice felt overwhelming. But the memory of her face at that engagement party, the cool satisfaction in her eyes as she publicly shamed me, would always resurface, stoking that inner fire. I wasn't just working for survival anymore. I was working to rebuild, to prove something to myself, and yes, to eventually show her. Claire's wedding day came and went. I attended, of course. I wore a simple, second-hand dress, held my head as high as I could, and endured the pitying glances and Claire's saccharine, condescending kindness. She made sure to introduce me to her new, wealthy in-laws as my poor sister Amelia, who's going through a bit of a rough patch, but we're all hoping for the best for her. I smiled politely, seething internally. During the reception, she cornered me. "You know, Amelia," she said, swirling her champagne, "Richard and I were talking. Once we're settled, maybe we could find some little admin job for you in his company. Nothing too taxing, of course." The offer, cloaked in faux generosity, was a calculated insult. I just looked at her and said, "Thank you, Claire, but I'm exploring some new opportunities. I think I'll be fine." Her eyebrows shot up in surprise at my refusal, but she quickly recovered, shrugging dismissively. "Suit yourself." Don't say I didn't try to help. That brief exchange hardened my resolve even further. I didn't want her pity jobs. I didn't want anything from her, or from my parents, who were now entirely caught up in the reflected glory of Claire's advantageous marriage. I was on my own, and that was okay. In fact, it was liberating. The years that followed were a blur of hard work. I moved from tiny freelance gigs to more substantial projects. I built a portfolio of successful digital marketing campaigns for small and medium-sized businesses. I learned to code proficiently enough to build custom websites and even dabble in app development. I reinvested every spare penny into more courses, better equipment, and eventually into building a new, lean, online-based business. This time, I was cautious, pragmatic, and fiercely independent. I had learned from my past mistakes. I diversified my client base, managed my finances meticulously, and trusted my gut. The business grew steadily, organically. I wasn't chasing glamour or quick wins. I was building something solid, sustainable. All this time, Oakhaven Manor remained a distant, almost mythical place in my mind. Claire still talked about it, of course. It was her forever home dream. She and Richard would often drive past it. She'd tell me during our infrequent and strained phone calls, sighing about how one day, when Richard's investments really paid off, they'd make an offer. I'd listen quietly, a small, secret smile playing on my lips. Because by then, my own financial situation was undergoing a seismic shift, one that nobody in my family, least of all Claire, could have ever imagined. The little online business had exploded, thanks to a niche I'd identified and a unique service I offered that no one else was doing quite as well. Money was no longer a source of constant anxiety. It was a tool, a resource I was learning to wield effectively. And the thought of Oakhaven started to solidify from a vague what-if into a very real, very tangible goal. Not for her, but for me. The journey from the coffee shop to seriously contemplating the purchase of Oakhaven Manor took about 7 years. 7 years of relentless, often solitary, work. My online digital strategy company, which I'd started with nothing more than a second-hand laptop and a fierce determination in my tiny bedsit, had grown beyond my wildest expectations. I'd specialized in a very particular niche, helping traditional, old-world businesses, think artisan craftsmen, bespoke tailors, heritage brands, navigate the digital age without losing their authenticity. It turned out to be a goldmine. These businesses had incredible products and stories, but were often clueless about online marketing, e-commerce, or even basic social media. I became their guide, their translator, and their results spoke for themselves. Word spread, and soon I had a waiting list of clients, many of them high-net-worth individuals or established companies willing to pay premium rates for my expertise. I never took on debt for the business this time. I grew it organically, reinvesting profits, hiring slowly and carefully, always keeping my overheads lean. I learned to say no to projects that weren't a good fit, a lesson hard learned from my first failed venture. My personal finances also transformed. I was no longer living hand to mouth. I saved aggressively, invested wisely, with the help of a financial advisor who wasn't a family member, and lived well below my means. The scars of bankruptcy had taught me the value of financial security, a lesson I would never forget. All this while, my contact with my family remained strained. My parents were pleased, in a distant sort of way, that I was doing better now, though they never quite understood what it was I actually did. "Something with computers, isn't it, dear?" my mother would say. Claire, now a mother of two, was ensconced in her role as Richard's wife, living a comfortable, suburban life. Her conversations with me were usually monologues about her children's achievements, her husband's stressful job, and her ongoing, wistful desire for Oakhaven Manor. "Oh, Amelia, you wouldn't believe it," she'd sigh dramatically during one of our rare calls. "We drove past Oakhaven again last weekend. There was a for sale sign up. Can you imagine? Richard says it's probably out of our league right now with the kids' school fees and everything, but honestly, it's my destiny to live in that house. I just know it." I would listen, make non-committal noises, and a quiet, almost mischievous plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't about revenge, not in the bitter, corrosive way it might have been years ago. The rage had long since transformed into a focused energy. This was about something else. It was about proving to myself, more than anyone, how far I'd come. It was about claiming something beautiful, not because someone else wanted it, but because I appreciated it, and I had earned it. Oakhaven Manor wasn't just any mansion. It was an iconic local landmark, a stunning piece of Victorian architecture with sprawling gardens, a place Claire had mooned over since we were teenagers. She had magazine clippings of it, had sketched her ideal renovations for its rooms, had even, pretentiously, referred to it as my future country seat. For her, it represented status and arrival. For me, it started to represent closure. And perhaps a very elegant, very undeniable statement. I began to research Oakhaven. The asking price was substantial, eye-watering even. But as I looked at my own financial statements, at the growth trajectory of my business, the idea shifted from a wild fantasy to a distinct possibility. I spoke to my financial advisor, who, after a thorough review, confirmed that if I liquidated certain investments and was prepared for the upkeep, it was within my reach. Without a mortgage. The thought sent a thrill through me. The irony was almost too delicious. The sister who had publicly shamed me for my bankruptcy, who had condescendingly offered me pity jobs, was still dreaming of a house I could potentially buy outright. I kept my plans completely secret. Not a word to Liam, my supportive friend, not a word to anyone. This was something I needed to do on my own. I contacted the estate agent handling the sale of Oakhaven, using a different name initially, just to make discreet inquiries. I arranged a private viewing. Walking through those grand rooms, across the polished oak floors, looking out at the magnificent, slightly overgrown gardens, I didn't just see a house. I saw a sanctuary. I saw a place where I could finally feel a sense of peace and accomplishment. It needed work, certainly, but its bones were beautiful, its history palpable. It felt right. The decision was made. I instructed my solicitor to make an offer, a strong, all-cash offer, slightly below the asking price, but with the allure of a quick, uncomplicated sale. There was a brief period of negotiation, the usual back and forth, but my cash position gave me significant leverage. And then, one crisp autumn afternoon, my solicitor called. "Amelia," he said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of satisfaction, "they've accepted your offer. Congratulations. Oakhaven Manor is yours." A wave of emotion washed over me. Relief, disbelief, a profound sense of vindication, and yes, a touch of nervous excitement. I had done it. Bankrupt Amelia, the family failure, had just bought the grandest house in the county. In cash. Now, all that remained was the reveal. And I knew exactly how I wanted it to happen. It wouldn't be a boastful announcement. It would be quiet, deliberate, and devastatingly effective. Claire's birthday was a few weeks away. I decided that would be the perfect occasion. The weeks leading up to Claire's birthday were a whirlwind of activity, all conducted with the utmost secrecy. The sale of Oakhaven Manor closed quickly, as cash deals often do. The keys were officially mine. I visited the house several times, walking through its empty, echoing rooms, a sense of profound disbelief warring with an immense, quiet pride. It was far too big for one person, of course, but that wasn't the point. The point was the journey, the symbolism, the sheer, unadulterated fact of its acquisition. I hired a cleaner to give the place a thorough once-over, but I decided against any major changes or furnishing it immediately. For the reveal, I wanted its grandeur to speak for itself, unadorned. Claire's birthday celebrations were typically a big affair, orchestrated by her, for her. This year, she'd planned a chic, intimate dinner at her and Richard's comfortable but decidedly un-Oakhaven-like home. My parents would be there, a few of Claire's closest friends, the same ones who had witnessed my public shaming years ago, and, of course, me. I RSVP'd yes, my tone deliberately neutral. In the days before the party, I did something a little mischievous. I knew Claire still obsessively checked the high-end property listings, always dreaming. I arranged with a local contact to have the sold sign placed very prominently outside Oakhaven just 2 days before her birthday. I imagined her driving past, as she often did, and seeing it. The pang of disappointment she'd feel, the renewed sense of it being just out of her grasp. It was a petty thought, I admit, but it brought a small, private smile to my face. On the evening of Claire's birthday, I chose my outfit carefully, a simple, elegant dress, understated jewelry. I wanted to look confident, serene, not flashy. I arrived at her house, gift in hand, a tastefully expensive, but not ostentatious designer scarf. I wasn't about to stoop to her level of deliberate meanness. The atmosphere was as expected, Claire basking in the attention, Richard playing the dutiful husband, my parents fussing over their birthday girl. There were polite inquiries about my computer business, which I answered vaguely, letting them maintain their comfortable assumptions about my modest success. The dinner conversation inevitably turned to property, as it often did with Claire. One of her friends mentioned a stunning house she'd seen featured in a magazine. Claire sighed dramatically. "Oh, don't talk to me about houses. My dream, Oakhaven, it's been sold. Can you believe it? Someone just snapped it up. Richard and I drove past the other day and there was this enormous sold sign. I nearly wept. It's probably some dreadful new money type who'll ruin it." She looked genuinely crestfallen, though her disappointment was, as always, laced with a theatrical flair. My mother patted her hand. "Never mind, dear. I'm sure something even better will come along for you one day." This was my moment. I waited for a lull in the conversation, then said, quite calmly, "Actually, Claire, I know who bought Oakhaven." Every head at the table turned towards me. Claire's eyes narrowed. "You do? Who?" "Someone we know." "Yes," I said, taking a slow sip of water. I met her gaze directly. I did. There was a stunned silence. Complete, utter, pin-drop silence. Claire's fork, halfway to her mouth, clattered onto her plate. Richard choked on his wine. My mother's jaw literally dropped. "You?" Claire finally managed, her voice a strangled whisper. "You bought Oakhaven Manor? Amelia, that's not funny." "I'm not joking, Claire," I said, my voice even. "The sale closed last week. It's mine." I reached into my purse and pulled out a single, newly minted key attached to a simple fob, placing it gently on the table. "I believe this is the key to the main entrance." The reactions were a kaleidoscope of disbelief. My father looked bewildered. My mother looked faint. Richard was staring at me as if I'd grown a second head. Claire's face went through a rapid series of emotions, shock, then confusion, then a dawning, horrified comprehension. The color drained from her face, then flooded back in a furious, mottled red. "You're lying," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You can't have. You were bankrupt. How could you possibly afford Oakhaven?" "A lot can change in 7 years, Claire," I said softly. "I've worked very hard. My business has been quite successful. You're your little computer thing, she spluttered, contemptuously. It can't have made you that much money. Oakhaven costs millions. It did, actually, I replied, still calm. And I paid cash. That was the verbal equivalent of a detonation. Cash. Richard blurted out, his eyes wide. Claire just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. The smug superiority, the condescending pity she had shown me for years, all of it just shattered. In its place was a raw, naked bewilderment, rapidly curdling into an envy so potent it was almost visible. Her carefully constructed world, where she was the successful one, the one destined for grandeur, and I was the pitiable failure, had just been turned completely upside down by me with a single, devastatingly quiet announcement. The rest of the dinner party was, to put it mildly, a disaster. But for me, it was the climax of a very long, very challenging chapter. The immediate aftermath of my announcement at Claire's birthday dinner was chaotic. Claire, after her initial stunned silence, erupted. Not in a graceful, "Oh wow, Amelia, congratulations" kind of way. No, this was pure, unfiltered Claire. You did this to spite me, she shrieked, her voice rising several octaves, any pretense of her chic, intimate dinner vanishing. You knew how much I wanted that house. You bought it just to rub my nose in it. Tears of rage and frustration streamed down her perfectly made-up face. Richard tried to calm her, muttering, "Now, Claire, darling." But she shrugged him off, her accusing gaze fixed on me. My mother, recovering from her shock, immediately rushed to Claire's side, cooing sympathetically. "Oh, my poor girl, this is such a shock for you." She shot me a look that was a mixture of bewilderment and reproach, as if I were the one causing a scene. My father just looked deeply uncomfortable, staring at his plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. "Actually, Claire," I said, my voice still remarkably steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, "I bought Oakhaven because I love it. Because I could afford it. And because, after everything, I felt I deserved something beautiful that I earned myself. Your desire for it was, at most, a secondary consideration, perhaps an ironic footnote. This, of course, only incensed her further." "A footnote? A footnote? You've always been jealous of me, Amelia. This is just your pathetic way of trying to one-up me." The accusation was so ludicrous, so completely me of the truth of our entire lives, that I almost laughed. "Jealous, Claire?" I asked, a small, sad smile playing on my lips. "Of what, exactly? Your talent for spending other people's money? Your inability to hold down a job? Or perhaps your extraordinary gift for public humiliation?" That silenced her for a moment. Her friends, who had been watching this family drama unfold with wide, avid eyes, suddenly found their shoes very interesting. My parents looked horrified that I would speak to Claire so bluntly. But years of suppressed resentment, of quiet endurance, were finally finding their voice. Richard, to his credit, tried to steer the conversation back to some semblance of civility, though it was a losing battle. "Amelia, this is extraordinary news," he said, clearly trying to process it. "Oakhaven is a significant property. Maintaining it will be a huge undertaking. I'm aware of the responsibilities, Richard," I replied. "And I'm prepared for them." The rest of the evening was a blur of accusations from Claire, half-hearted attempts at peacemaking from Richard, and my mother alternately comforting Claire and looking at me as if I were a stranger. My father remained largely silent, a worried frown etched on his face. I didn't engage much further. I had said what needed to be said. The truth was out there, undeniable and glittering. As I was leaving, Claire, her face tear-streaked and blotchy, confronted me at the door. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat. "You think buying a big, empty house makes you better than me?" I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time without the filter of old hurts or sibling rivalry. And what I saw was not a triumphant victor, but someone small, insecure, and deeply unhappy, her sense of self entirely dependent on external validation and outshining others. "This isn't about winning or losing, Claire," I said quietly. This is about me finally building a life I'm proud of on my own terms. Oak Haven is a part of that. It's not a weapon against you. It's a testament to myself. She just scoffed, unconvinced, and slammed the door behind me. The drive home to my still modest apartment, I hadn't moved into Oak Haven yet. There was much to plan and do, was quiet. I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The confrontation had been draining, but also incredibly liberating. The secret was out. The power dynamic within my family had irrevocably shifted. The next few days brought a flurry of phone calls. My mother called, her tone oscillating between wanting more details. "How on earth did you manage this, Amelia? Are you sure it's all legal?" And expressing concern for Claire. "She's terribly upset, you know." "You really did upset the underscore and ref_1 apple cart." My father called, more pragmatically, asking if I needed any advice on property management, a belated and somewhat awkward offer of paternal guidance. Liam, my old friend, to whom I finally confessed everything, was ecstatic. "You legend," he yelled down the phone. "That's the most epic comeback story I've ever heard. When do I get the grand tour?" His genuine joy was a welcome antidote to my family's mixed reactions. Claire, predictably, went silent for a while. I heard through my mother that she was refusing to speak about it and was deeply wounded. The real test, I knew, would be how we all moved forward from this. Or if we could move forward at all. The purchase of Oak Haven wasn't just about a house. It was a declaration of independence, a redrawing of boundaries that had been blurred and violated for far too long. The initial shockwaves were significant, but the real changes were yet to come. In the weeks and months that followed the dramatic reveal, the landscape of my family relationships underwent a seismic shift. My mother, after her initial shock and concern for Claire, slowly began to exhibit a grudging respect, bordering on awe. Her calls became less about Claire's feelings and more peppered with curious questions about Oak Haven, about my business, about how I'd managed such a turnaround. It was as if, for the first time, she was seeing me not as reliable Amelia who will manage or poor Amelia who failed, but as a capable, successful woman in my own right. There was still a degree of bewilderment, a sense that my success was somehow an anomaly, but the dismissiveness was gone. My father, in his quiet way, also seemed proud. He started forwarding me articles on heritage property restoration and even offered to help with some of the garden work at Oak Haven, a gesture that, while I politely declined for the most part, touched me. It was a fumbling attempt at connection, an acknowledgement of my new status, and I appreciated it for what it was. Richard, Claire's husband, surprised me. He called me a week or so after the infamous birthday dinner. "Amelia," he began, his tone conciliatory, "I just wanted to say congratulations. Seriously, what you've achieved is incredible. Claire is taking it hard, but that's between you two. From my perspective, Oak Haven is a magnificent place, and I have to admire your tenacity in acquiring it." His pragmatism and genuine respect were unexpected, and I found myself warming to him slightly. He was, it seemed, less caught up in the family drama and more able to see the situation objectively. Claire, however, remained a vortex of bitterness and resentment. For several months, she refused to speak to me directly. Any communication was relayed through my mother, usually complaints about how I had stolen her dream and deliberately tried to humiliate her. I didn't engage. I was busy. Moving into Oak Haven was a project in itself. The house was structurally sound but needed cosmetic updates and furnishing from scratch. I approached it methodically, joyfully even. Choosing paint colors, selecting furniture that was my taste, not what I thought would impress others, planning the restoration of the beautiful old gardens. It was a creative outlet, a tangible manifestation of my new life. I hired local artisans and craftspeople, many of whom I'd helped with their digital presence through my business, creating a wonderful synergy. Oak Haven wasn't just a house, it was becoming a home, filled with light and possibility. Slowly, very slowly, Claire began to thaw, though not in a way I would call reconciliatory. It started with backhanded compliments relayed through Mom. "Well, Mother, I suppose the color Amelia chose for the drawing room isn't completely ghastly then. Eventually, a direct, stiffly formal text message. Mother says you're having some people over for Easter. Richard and I and the children will attend. If the invitation is still open, the invitation hadn't actually been formally extended yet, but I understood. This was her way of testing the waters, of re-entering my orbit, albeit on her terms. I agreed. Easter at Oakhaven was interesting. Claire swept in, eyes critically assessing every detail, from the flower arrangements to the canapes. She made a point of sighing dramatically in rooms she had particularly coveted, muttering things like, I always envisioned a rather different chaise lounge here, but there was also a new, grudging curiosity in her demeanor. She asked surprisingly astute questions about the restoration process, her old interest in interior design briefly flickering to life. Her children, my niece and nephew, were oblivious to the undercurrents and simply thrilled by the sheer size of the house and the sprawling gardens, which I'd made sure were full of Easter egg hunt possibilities. Watching them run and laugh, I felt a pang. This house was big enough for more than just me. The true turning point, if you could call it that, came about a year after I moved in. Claire's marriage to Richard had been showing cracks for some time. His pragmatism often clashed with her entitlement and expectations. Eventually, they separated. It was messy and acrimonious. Claire, for the first time in her adult life, found herself genuinely struggling, both emotionally and financially. Richard was fair in the settlement, but not extravagant, and Claire had no real career or savings of her own to fall back on. Her lifestyle was suddenly under threat. One afternoon, she turned up on Oakhaven's doorstep unannounced. She looked diminished. Her usual polished facade was gone, replaced by a weary vulnerability I had never seen in her before. She didn't rage or accuse. She simply looked at me, tears in her eyes, and said, Amelia, I don't know what to do. It wasn't an apology, not in words. But it was the closest she'd ever come to admitting she needed help, needed me. I invited her in. We sat in the grand drawing room, the one she'd criticized, and for the first time we talked. Really talked. Not as the golden child and the scapegoat, but as two sisters who had, in our vastly different ways, navigated a complicated family and a challenging world. I didn't offer her pity, nor did I rub salt in her wounds. I listened, and then I offered her something practical, a role in managing the events side of Oakhaven, which I was considering launching: weddings, corporate retreats, garden parties. It would utilize her, however latent, skills in event planning and interior design, give her an income and a sense of purpose. She was stunned. But why would you do that? She asked, her voice thick with unshed tears. After everything? Because, Claire, I said, despite everything, you're still my sister. And perhaps it's time we both started acting like it. It wasn't an instant fix. Our relationship is still complex, a work in progress. There are still moments of tension, echoes of old patterns. But there's also a new foundation of mutual, if sometimes grudging, respect. She took the job, and, to my surprise, she's actually quite good at it when she applies herself. She's learning responsibility, learning the value of earning her own way. Oakhaven Manor, the house she dreamed of, became the place where she started to rebuild her own life, under the roof of the sister she once publicly shamed. The irony is not lost on either of us. My life now is peaceful, fulfilling. My business continues to thrive. Oakhaven is filled with warmth, with friends, and sometimes with the tentative laughter of a family slowly healing. The public shaming feels like a lifetime ago, a painful but ultimately transformative catalyst. It taught me about resilience, about the quiet power of unwavering determination, and about the surprising ways in which vindication can arrive, not always in a blaze of glory, but sometimes in the quiet turning of a key in a lock and the even quieter mending of broken bonds. It taught me that true wealth isn't just about money or possessions. It's about self-respect, about building a life of purpose and integrity, and perhaps about the capacity for forgiveness, even when it's hardest. So, that's my story. From the depths of bankruptcy and public humiliation at the hands of my own sister, to buying her dream mansion in cash and eventually finding a new, more authentic path for myself and even, unexpectedly, for our relationship. It's been a wild, improbable journey, and one that has taught me more about myself and about life than I could ever have imagined. The anger and the need for revenge that burned so fiercely in me after that engagement party, they've largely faded. What remains is a profound sense of gratitude for the strength I discovered within myself, for the support of friends like Liam who stood by me, and even, in a strange way, for the challenges Claire and my family presented, because without them, I might never have dug so deep or climbed so high. Oakhaven Manor stands as a beautiful testament not to spite, but to perseverance. It's a symbol that rock bottom can be a solid foundation on which to rebuild something extraordinary. It's taught me that success isn't about conforming to other people's expectations or outshining anyone else. It's about defining your own version of happiness and working tirelessly and ethically to achieve it. My relationship with Claire is still evolving. It's not perfect, far from it. Decades of ingrained dynamics don't just disappear overnight. But there's a new honesty between us, a raw understanding that wasn't there before. She's learning to stand on her own feet, and I'm learning to see her not just as the golden child antagonist of my past, but as a flawed human being capable of growth, just like me. My parents, too, have slowly come to appreciate the woman I've become, not just the resourceful Amelia they took for granted. There's a different quality to our interactions now, a respect that was missing for so many years. Looking back, the public shaming was a crucible. It was designed to break me, to cement my status as a failure. Instead, it forged me into someone stronger, more resilient, and ultimately more compassionate. It forced me to confront my own narratives about my worth, to shed the limiting beliefs I'd internalized from childhood, and to build a life based on my own values and my own terms. And that, I believe, is the greatest vindication of all. So, what about you all? I'd love to hear in the comments if any part of this story resonated with you. Have you ever faced a devastating setback or a betrayal from someone close? How did you find the strength to overcome it and rewrite your own narrative? Sharing our stories can be incredibly powerful, a way to connect and to remind each other that we're not alone in our struggles or our triumphs. If this story did touch you, or if you found some inspiration in it, please do give this video a thumbs up. It really helps others find it. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out on future content. I plan to share more about the ongoing journey, perhaps even some tours of Oakhaven as it continues to evolve, and other life lessons I've picked up along the way. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, and for being a part of this community. Remember, no matter what challenges you face, you have an inner strength you might not even be aware of yet. Sometimes it just takes the right spark, or the wrong one, as in my case, to ignite it. Until next time, take care, be kind to yourselves, and keep building your own beautiful realities.